stratigraphic sequence at any time. So the surfaces became the key to the whole business. Anyway, so we went on from there. We did various experiments. I went to London and they were digging a very large site next to St. Paul's Cathedral, and I asked them to test the system, which they did with the consent of their director, Brian Hobley, at the time. And they came back at the end of it and said, this makes our job easier. We understand what we're doing. It's a control on the excavation. When you have, as you're building the stratigraphic sequence, as you dig, a new person comes onto the site, say, here's where you are. You're starting to dig underneath of it, and you continue down from there. This gentleman, this was a couple of years ago, he's working on an enormous stratigraphic sequence, doing it by hand, but of course now you have a number of wonderful programs that you can do it with. Anyway, this took hold, and seen in other representations, this was the stratigraphic cake that the people in Vienna made for the 35th anniversary of the Matrix, and in this case we ate all the evidence. It's being used on all sorts of stratigraphic situations, not only underwater sites, but rock art, paintings, standing buildings, all sorts of things. So now it's available in programs which you put in the information, put a line between the two units in the direction that says one is on top of the other and so on. Hit the button and it draws your stratigraphic sequence. This is made by my colleagues in Vienna. I have no monetary interest in it, but it's the Harris Matrix Composer, which makes music for your site. And then Apple Computer, when they were advertising one of their iPads several years ago, showed some archaeologists at Pompeii who used the iPad to keep track of their sequences. Now, the Matrix is now 41 years old, but it shows no sign of slowing down. And recently in the United States, a group of arson investigators are beginning to push for the idea that arson sites should be investigated by archaeologists, not by the SWAT team or the police or whatever. But these are archaeological entities, and their investigation should take place upon stratigraphic methods. And then this book with a strange title has a whole chapter on archaeological ethics. But there's nothing in it to talk about the ethics of excavation and to what standards we should hold archaeologists who go out and excavate. And this is an issue that we have to address because some people continue to excavate in a non-stratigraphic manner, and they don't come away with a stratigraphic sequence for their sites. There's another issue which is going to come up, and I'm just showing this slide, but there was in the Basque Country a little while ago where there's a bit of a controversy. I've had a look at some of the work, very fine excavations, and they used the matrix, so of course it must be true. But the point here is that we're now eventually going to face the question of admissible evidence in court. And this is particularly true with regard to genocide sites, where there are still the two methods of excavation taking place, and eventually this is going to end up in court as it will in other circumstances. So the question is, if you go to court and the judge and the jury are going to decide on the evidence you presented as an archaeologist, who is going to come out on top? The people who use stratigraphic methods, produce a stratigraphic sequence, record their surfaces, or people who do it in another way? And these are issues that we are going to have to face moving forward. But anyway, the matrix continues to take root, which is wonderful, and I think the evidence of a lot of younger people here today suggests that it might still have some validity. It's ended up in a number of textbooks, and it's also here. This was the party that we had in Vienna for the 35th anniversary. It was a whole Roman town, which we ate, including the burials and so on. So it's taken hold of people's imaginations. There's an American archaeologist who has the lovely name of Kathleen Wheeler. And those of you who know a bit about English archaeology know there are sort of two greats in the 50s and 60s, Dame Kathleen Kenyon and Sir Mortimer Wheeler. So she couldn't go wrong, and then she also named her cat Paris. And then one day from India, Ravi, archaeologist, sent me a letter. I've been reading to write for a long time. We've named our son Paris. And I wrote back and I said, well, this is wonderful, and nickname, but forget it, No, here's the birth certificate. So this poor chap has to run around with an Anglo name in the deepest parts of India. It's also entered into various bits of modern literature. It's Jesus video, whatever, and Paris there and so forth. And those of you who like to read detective novels, like this one here, it's also there. So an aerial shot of the site on one wall, a Harris matrix facing it, the strata of the excavation reformed as diagrams. I don't know whether it had to do with the murder or not. So, stratification is, to me, the most wonderful part about archaeology, particularly if you're excavating. And if you can learn to think stratigraphically, it changes the whole way you look at the world. And of course, the whole world is nothing but a great stratigraphic concept. And so at one point I made this matrix of the world, where we started off in the center, and then you had the geology swirling around with all its layers and what have you, rocks and what have you. And then out of it, of course, you would have archaeological sites springing forth and eventually being connected. Now the point of all that is that we took our concepts of archaeology, archaeological stratigraphy, from geology, and we didn't change them. And part of the thrust behind the matrix was to say that we need our own stratigraphy. We need our archaeological stratigraphy because we create phenomena that don't exist in nature. And therefore we need our own rules and regulations in order to understand the material to which we've been entrusted as archaeologists. So we had to break away from the geologists. And any of you who follow things in America, you know, for a while there was quite a storm between the geoarchaeologists who were geologically based and archaeologists who said we had to have a revolution and move things ahead. They've now been largely converted, but anyway, it's now in a number of languages. And as I'm sure the younger people know, most of these editions now are available for free on the website, which we created. We bought out the publishers because it was too expensive, and we put it for free on the internet where it will remain. So as you can see there, it's in Spanish, Finnish language, all these other languages, Japanese and Hungarian, and it's now coming out in German and Czech. It'll be in Chinese later this year, and two people are working on a French and Russian edition. Part of the reason for putting it on the website as well is, as you know, the way to get to the entire world now is through the internet. And so that's one of the reasons why we decided, and my colleagues from the University of Vienna have set the website up and they've been maintaining it. And so here you can see a couple of maps, you know, these hit maps that you can make up of who's visited your site. And so that was in 2008, and you can see here the world is becoming very red. And slowly but surely, anyway, we're taking over. And the diagram is at the bottom is when I was in Spain 25 years ago. We went to Girona for a conference, and this was the little leaflet that they made up, and it had the schedule on the other side, and you could fold it out. And when we got to Girona, we found every tree and telephone pole had one of these wrapped around it and stapled to let the German folks know that Matrix was in town or something. So, we return back to the business of surfaces and holes. The surfaces that are holes, such as when you dig a well or you dig a trench, are the problem children in stratification because they disrupt the normal superimposed layering, and they have to be dealt with properly, or the material inside of them can't take their proper place in the stratigraphic sequence. And because of a failure, or it just didn't come at the time, to understand the value of surfaces in stratigraphic analysis, many sites simply, many archaeologists in a way, simply dug a hole into history to a large degree by not fully recording the surfaces of archaeological sites and the information that they represented. So we like to think now that we're moving to a state where when we do an archaeological excavation, we're capturing all of the surfaces on that site, and therefore we can end up with a proper stratigraphic sequence. Well, you can see I'm an example of what happened here. Diseases of the brain. Anyway, this is a recent friend of mine who does these arty photographs, but he did this without my real consent, but he put the matrix on the floor, and that was a bottle of wine that they produced in Vienna as well, which they made me love him and so forth. Anyway, so, just to go back, if I may. So this was an interesting journey for me. I'm very pleased that I was able to sort of do it. I ended up doing my PhD thesis on it by accident, and so I was able to spend some time really looking into methods in archaeological stratigraphy and to come up with some suggestions for how things might be done differently, better, more efficiently, and then allow you as digging archaeologists to spend your time on the more important work, which is the analysis of everything after the fact. And again, I come back to the fact that these are the DNA model, if you will, of an archaeological site. These are the testing patterns against which all categories of artifacts must be compared and analyzed. And you cannot, no artifact can change this sequence, even if you got the sequence wrong. You can make things about it. They cannot change the sequence. They can only make it grow or collapse depending on the chronological information with an outside time scale that they represent. So these stratigraphic sequences, which is what they are, forget the Harris matrix, these are stratigraphic sequences showing you a time chart for each archaeological site, which is unique to each archaeological site, which is its value. But of course, the other point about it is that you can use this on any archaeological site in the world because it's based upon the principles of stratification, not on whether this is Roman or medieval or whatever it is. If you want to be a good excavator, you can produce wonderful excavation data and stratigraphic sequences, without knowing anything about the artifact. Now, I'm speaking in an extreme, but that's the point of it. It's the stratigraphic matters, and your job as a digging archaeologist is to leave the site with this thing under your arm, which should not be a problem because, of course, digging each day, you can only dig so many deposits each day by hand, and you build your sequence up as you go on the site like we. So, as I said before, from my point of view, stratification is one of the most interesting aspects of being an archaeologist, and the more we understand what it's all about, and the more we can report it, the greater truths we'll find, and the greater justice we will do to the archaeological sites we will dig. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for me at the moment. I don't give long, which you might consider academic speeches. I'm just touching the surfaces. But the surfaces are always there. They're the key to stratification. And I hope you've all enjoyed that, and we can certainly do a number of questions because they're always fun to get some interaction and to see what you all are thinking. So again, Mr. Director, thank you very much for the invitation to talk this evening, and thanks to all of you for coming out. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you, particularly the younger people who are the archaeologists of the future. Remember, according to the students in Barcelona, I'm dead.
Venga, todos cuestiones que el primero se decida.
¿Me puede traducir? Yo no voy a hablar en castellano. Él sabe que yo no hablo castellano, le estuve acompañando cuando vine al Congreso de Iruña Velella, estuve acompañando durante 5 días. Doctor Harris, usted sabe que llevamos 6 años tratando de poner luz en el yacimiento de Iruña Velella. Usted ha conocido el yacimiento, ha visto el trabajo, los cuadernos de campo del equipo anterior, Eliseo Gil y Afillón, y ha visto el trabajo del equipo actual de la Universidad del País Vasco, ha visto el sector, no recuerdo exactamente, creo que es el sector número 6, que fue destruido por la excavadora, con el actual equipo de Iruña Velella. ¿Qué piensa sobre la cuestión? ¿Es la arqueología una ciencia o a lo mejor es algo que hay que recurrir al tarot?
I have to be careful what I say. I might be in court tomorrow. It was a privilege to be in the Basque Country a few years ago and to be acquainted with the controversy there. It's my view that it's an unfortunate controversy for archaeology in general, and that really it should be, everyone should sit down and go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. When I looked at the report on the site, what I could say was that it looked like the site had been extremely well excavated stratigraphically. Stratigraphic sequences were made, and I come back to the point that the stratigraphic sequence is the testing pattern for what happened on the site, and and it also is where you lock in the artifacts that you take out of deposits into the stratigraphic sequence. So an issue like this, I think one has to go back to basics with some outside experts and relook at the excavation, look at the stratigraphic sequences that were made, look at the artifacts that were found, go and see where they said they found them in the stratigraphic sequence, and begin to get a true sense of whether the placement of everything was where it belonged. So this is an interesting example of how if you do your stratigraphy correct, and if you understand how to dig stratigraphically and to record stratigraphically, you should be able to go anywhere in the world and look at reports or records and see whether archaeologists are doing their job correct or not. That's part of the matrix is sort of like a double entry bookkeeping for accounting. You can become an auditor and to see whether the experiment was done on a particular date was done correctly or not. And not out of that other things fall. So this has to be looked at in detail, as you should look in detail back to the stratigraphy for any situation that's a controversy in archaeology.
Dice que bien, él ha visto el sitio, ha visto los trabajos de campo del yacimiento de Virginia Borella, que a él le pareció correcto y bien hecho, pero que la gente tiene que ir a mirar y a discutir los detalles de los estratos y los detalles técnicos arqueológicos para realmente tomar una decisión, y no tiene que salir la discusión del terreno estrictamente científico. Y esto es lo que ha dicho y ha repetido otra vez. Ha vuelto a repetir que los que se han inglés han visto que hay que ir a los estratos, hay que ir a revisar técnicamente, y que esto es un ejemplo técnicamente de los hallazgos, y que esto es un ejemplo de lo que puede ocurrir en todas partes del mundo, y para lo que sirve la matriz suya y de definir los hallazgos de los estratos.
Juan Clothaya, I'll speak in English for your benefit. Make a recipe in Spanish afterwards. I'm not really going to ask a question, I just simply want to thank you, because I was one of the first to use your system in 1977 in Spain.
Give him my hand.
He's like the boss. And
yes.
What I find that is very interesting of your system is that most probably we're going to be able to apply it to cultural evolution in landscapes.
Absolutely. Yes, I should have.
Excuse
Sorry.
me.
Oh, you tell them.
Yes. No, había dicho al profesor Harris que aparte de que venía a agradecerle, porque yo fui de los primeros que utilizó, si no el primero, utilizó el sistema Harris en España en el año 77. Pero lo interesante de su sistema es que muy posiblemente se puede aplicar estratos culturales en el estudio del paisaje, desde el punto de vista arqueológico.
Yes, what the professor is saying is absolutely correct. And of course, surfaces expanded to generality, a landscape. And so when you're reconstructing your archaeological site in terms of its landscape, you're reconstructing the surfaces. You're building up all the various surfaces of the site through time. And that's one of the most important jobs you have to do. Now, in order to do it and get it all in good order, you have to analyze the artifacts. So this is where it becomes really heavy duty and difficult, and where today you're so lucky to have the computers, because you're eventually going to be dealing with the permutations of stratigraphic sequences. And I will demonstrate to you very simply what I'm talking about. These two items are in superposition. Not a problem. No matter what happens, no matter what the artifacts say chronologically, these two are in superposition, and this is under this one here. So if all the artifacts dating-wise here contradict this one, then you've got to look at the next one. You've got to look at the one underneath to try and figure out whether everything in here is useless because it came down the tree root or whatever, and so on. And this applies to anything. A lot of people look at radiocarbon dates and think, oh, this is perfect and so on, but the fact of the matter is it's based on portable artifacts to a degree, which can move. Now, so I have here on this desk, I have a multilinear stratigraphic sequence of a dozen or so artifacts and so on. So this is in superposition to this piece of glass here. It's not in superposition to this. So which one of these in absolute time is later or earlier? And if this one's later, it pushes, and we're talking about a deposit now, it pushes its surface up with it. So it pushes the surface up to a higher point. Or it may be like that. Well, and then you can have these two. You know, these two are later than this, or that's later than those two, or whatever. And we did one little, we took a tube of 13 layers, and then we flipped it upside down and made them all interface surfaces. But anyway, for that one 13-layer stratigraphic unit, there were 252 possible permutations of all the different deposits that weren't in superposition. And this is where the fun really begins, and this is where you people are so lucky, you younger people, to have computers to do analysis for you, and so on. But in reconstructing the surface on an archaeological site, it can't be done just through the surfaces and the deposits alone, because you need the information of the artifacts to push or reduce in absolute time the surfaces. And on a small site, this is not so much of a problem. On some sites, you have indicators such as a Roman tessellated floor, which clearly is going to be, it's going to put a lock on things and so on. But this is a real problem for archaeology, because in the old days, you get this, and the director would come in, oh, Roman coin, it must be 3rd century. What was never really done was to start to stack all the things up, because they didn't have the stacks to stack them against except for section drawings. So, in other words, Richard Rees, a friend of mine working at Carthage, analyzing coins, he had a matrix diagram, and he had all the coins, and most of the coins were absolutely useless for dating purposes, because they had moved around so much, and they were residual or this, that, and another, and so on. But you only come to that realization by looking at the whole column. So you can't reconstruct the landscape on a complex site without the help of the analysis of the artifacts. So your first job is to record all these surfaces individually. And this is why, again, I mentioned notebooks. When I started on Lewis Brook Street site, I had 70 notebooks. What I should have done with the notebooks is taken them to the printer and chopped the binding off of each notebook so I could move the records around. Because as you're digging, you're not necessarily fully digging everywhere.